subject assigned to me for this week is a continuation of the last talk we had on budgeting a nation state. And because it was Pakistan specific, we need to continue with the subject yet again today, because there are structural issues which inflict the Pakistan economy insofar as viewing the ritual of annual budget declarations, and more so because of the hidden impact the budgeting mechanism has presently on the entire nation state, on the entire country. Currently, in one sentence, there is a clear absence of a national economy. So the budgeting exercise is fraught with generating multiple economies within Pakistan, and in their periphery, under their umbrella, is also the creation of mafias, cartels, and groupings that breach the law on a continual basis and are poised to benefit a handful of elite in total disregard of the welfare of the population. So we'll start first with the structure as it does exist. The present structure is divided into two parts: direct taxation and indirect taxation. And this is being regulated, controlled, and imposed by a federal institution called the Federal Board of Revenue. Now, these taxes, which are collected direct and indirect from across the country, are accumulated into a pool with the Federation, and then at their will and political wisdom, for whatever that represents, is distributed across the country to various provinces. There is a serious conflict of interest. There is a serious dichotomy in the application of the law when you do this, because while the constitutional amendments provide for decentralized management of money by provinces, for them to receive money from the Federation in itself is an act which sows the seed of disunity, conflict, and a compromise in the commonality of interests as a nation ought to have. What ought to be in its place is fiscal decentralization, but we will come to that later in this particular talk. Presently, the situation is direct and indirect taxes, which spare nobody from amongst the population, are collected and accumulated in a pool, and that pool is being managed by a handful of rulers, not servants, who on the dictates of their donors, primarily colonists, distribute the funds to various provinces, protecting provincialism, parochialism, and other forms of groupings within the social fabric of Pakistan. Ideally, the decentralized structure should deem to collect revenue in localized pockets and cede a certain percentage to the Federation to manage national security, foreign affairs, the Department of Justice, and under that, the enforcement of standards and processes across the board. That is how development on a judicious plane takes place. The next point I need to address are the revenue sources of taxes. Now, taxes basically determine, as I said at the outset, represent the money required for running a government, for operating a government. Now, the greater the heads of accounts, the more strangulated, stagnated, and constrained is the vibrance and dynamics of any economy. So if you have 107 heads of accounts on the basis of which you have to place your population under duress for collections, the potential of a population to strive, innovate, compete, and rise to meet with global challenges keeps dying, fading away, and getting into a mode which, from the perspective of sociology, creates a culture of slavery. So the sources of revenue have to be as little as possible. Sources of revenue from the perspective of our ideology should be only based on land utilization and land revenue. Other than that, the levels of consumption can be taxed, but to a limit which is already predetermined, or which should already be predetermined in the Constitution or by way of laws or legislation. Now, when we talk of one source of revenue, then we have two aspects to cover here. Number one, if it is going to be land revenue, every person or part of the population becomes a taxpayer, because nobody can live suspended in the air. We all live on the ground, and if we do live on the ground, we need to pay a tax for it. Now this becomes the primary source of revenue for any nation state. And we are talking about Pakistan right now, and this is what it ought to be. The rest of the activities, the rest of the heads of accounts for collection, which generate corruption, which generate regress, must be shelved. And the suggestions of any donor or any economic advisor alien to our ideology must be disregarded and kept away. In my previous talks, we have already given an arithmetic, a breakdown of the current base for tax collection, which can be 35 times more than the present, should we only concentrate on land revenue coming out of urban units and on the basis of corporate agriculture, corporate mining, corporate tourism, corporate industrial states, and that's about it. Price controls, which has been a handy alibi for the bureaucracy to keep the economy their captive, or several economies within the country as their captive, has been price controls. Price controls in a free economy are determined by competition and not determined by control by any bureaucratic regime that may be in existence at any given point in time in any country. Pakistan, without an iota of doubt, upholds the freedom of the economy or within the economy in the hands of the bureaucracy that has taken it captive. The consequences are very apparent. There is an economy of the army, there is an economy of the bureaucracy, there is an economy of the peddlers and mafia managers, i.e. the politicians. And then there is an economy of the wretched people. And this is extremely detrimental because it only supports one agenda, the agenda of the colonists, an agenda which we fought for freedom from prior to 1947, but are determined to uphold this by being hoodwinked by leadership in succession from 1947 to date. This ritual must come to an end. It is absolutely unacceptable to any self-respecting or freedom-aspiring nation or people anywhere on the planet. The heads of accounts is probably going to be the next subject because it is all related to the budget. Now, by any hypothesis, if one nation state, as a consequence of taxing land alone or the usage of land by all across the board, people, institutions, if they have to pay for it, then that pool of money has to be spent on the welfare of the people. It is for the people that the revenue is generated, and governments are only servants or managers who ensure the judicious management of that money, not on political criteria, but on the criteria of what is required at the highest standards for subsistence, the highest standards for security, the highest standards for medical care, health care, for highest standards for building and processes. It is with this vision in view that I have been proposing recurrently 100% urbanization in Pakistan, so that the population is contained within defined limits of urban units, or call them municipal companies, quoted on the stock exchange, and they are regulated for standards, for building, for cleanliness, for hygiene, for the welfare of the people who live within. And beyond that, they seed out that amount of money which the Federation has to have to provide security to the entire nation state, and for the purposes of establishing a regulatory regime so that standards are not compromised. If we need to catapult a nation state to the levels of the developed world, we cannot disregard people as the principal source of energy that drives this particular objective. If you use people as a source to sponge money from, to feed provincial and federal elite, then most certainly the future of the nation state into infinity is doomed. The heads of accounts for expenses are simple. They're at the highest level of standard for subsistence at the micro level, which is urban units, municipal companies, industries, agricultural land, mining areas, tourism areas. The first level of expense has to be the maintenance of standards. The second level of expense is the amount they need to seed out each particular unit to the Federation only for three purposes: positioning the country in the community of nations, and by that yardstick protecting your own ideology, in disregard, complete disregard of any other nation state's agenda, economic or political. Second, providing security which enables the nation state to defend itself, its frontiers, its people. And third, for firmly establishing a regulatory regime with an enforcement arm, so that no aspect of standards, no aspect of crime is ever attempted. So towards managing the expense aspect of the budget, these are the two things, the revenue and the expenses, that have to be clearly spelled out before a budget can be addressed. A budget, in the form it does exist, is the cart before the horse. We need to define the horse that is going to draw the cart. The regulatory regime and the question of standards are again very, very significant, because the regulatory regime in any nation state is based upon the standards you have adopted, which is on a constant evolutionary platform, just like our ideology suggests. With one word, ijtihad. It is applicable across the board. So if we have methods for generating energy, if we have technology for flying in the air and swimming in the sea, or defending ourselves with weapons which are ahead of the game or comparable to the best available in the world. These are standards which the regulatory regime must uphold on a constant basis and keep upgrading it and ensuring that our industries, our agriculture, our mining, our municipal cities, our people are following it and are being provided for it. With the absence of these plans, any government in office has to be presumed as a government in office serving the interest of colonists right through. All the political rhetoric being dished out by them is hogwash. It means nothing, because it means nothing for the people. The exercise of elections, the exercise of voting, the exercise of change of faces are all irrelevant, insignificant, unless the people are benefiting from the sources of revenue clearly defined, clearly identified, and from the sources of and from the heads of account representing expenses, which must be clearly defined and must be invoked. So, if we, as the bastions of and defenders of our ideology, can invoke our model, we can absolutely count on the fact that nation states across the board will try and replicate it, increasing our strength among the allies. Take the rudimentary setup in Afghanistan, for instance, as an example. They are warlords. The country is torn among warlords, absolutely armed. Here in Pakistan, we are also torn, not among warlords, but economic groupings that are grabbing land, that are grabbing money, and that is all being done unabated in total disregard of the Constitution or any law that may be in existence. For the people of Pakistan, this is suicidal. And we must challenge this, address this, change this. If we uphold this any further, what we are failing to see in clear perspective is that we are upholding, precipitating, and strengthening the continuation of monolithic rule within Pakistan. We are with a smoke screen, allowing the leadership, the elite, the echelon, to remain part of a global club that has colonized the world. And we will keep perpetuating this from one person to another, from one group to another, in succession. If we probe into our history, this is exactly what has been happening for the last 7 decades. And it must not be allowed, because it is detrimental to our people who are starving, who are remaining uneducated, who are without health care, without education, without any facility that the human soul deserves anywhere on the planet. There are theses and there are counter-theses, but here it is a question of addressing fact from fiction. This is not a thesis, this is reality. And realities, when they do exist in the manner they do here, are gross. And if there is a route which mitigates the dilemma, then for us to adopt it is common sense. I have basically tried to encapsulate my thought on the structure of the budget in conclusion, as it ought to be, and the structure that does exist and its harmful existence, and therefore from this talk we must try to deduce the way forward, to identify and understand the way forward. One can only aspire that a corporate Pakistan, where the people and their activities are hand in glove, and the governments they put into office are regulators and managers of their security, is a wish we aspire for.